It's the biggest corruption scandal South America has ever seen. And here in Brazil, it has rocked business and politics to the core. More than half the entire Brazilian Senate has been implicated in bribery allegations. A third of Brazil's Congress has been ordered to attend court. Brazilian billionaires, once seen as nearly untouchable in this society, have been handcuffed and imprisoned. And last week, the biggest and most controversial prize of all for the prosecutors, former President Lula, previously feted as the world's most popular leader, arrested and taken to jail. Some say this is justice for all, others that it's a witch hunt. We spoke exclusively to Sergio Moro, the young Brazilian judge who's leading this massive investigation. We ask, where will this all end? A new, less corrupt Brazil, or a more divided country? This is where it began, an unremarkable petrol station and car wash centre in the capital, Brasilia. In March 2014, it was under surveillance by the federal police. They were looking into a money laundering case. Intercepted emails revealed that one of the suspects was connected with a senior executive in Brazil's national oil company, Petrobras. What was initially an investigation into dirty money began to expose dirty politics. It became known as the Car Wash Inquiry, Lava Jato in Portuguese. The Petrobras executive who was implicated, Paulo Alberto Costa, was in charge of the firm's refining division. Brazilian prosecutors got access to his bank accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands and found that he had $25 million stashed away. The investigators offered Costa a plea bargain deal, give information in return for a lesser sentence. He agreed. He then spelled out the details of the scheme. What emerged was a massive scam, whereby the state-owned Petrobras would accept bribes from companies, which would then be awarded contracts at vastly inflated prices. The overcharge would be split between Petrobras executives, the construction companies, and then a percentage paid to politicians. To understand the scale of the money being stolen, one relatively junior manager later paid a fine of $100 million from his personal account. As the investigation expanded, more and more people got caught up in it. Former President Lula was convicted of accepting bribes from a construction company in the form of an upgraded seaside apartment. The man leading the prosecutions is a judge, Sergio Moro, from the southern city of Curitiba. We spoke to him the day after he'd issued an arrest warrant against the former president.
I'm not very comfortable in answering these specific questions about the case, but let me just say this. I received an order from the appeal court ordering the arrest. So I just complied with the order. I don't have the choice to not complying with the order.
Right, so you felt you had no choice but to move quickly?
He was convicted for money laundering and corruption, and you have to enforce the judgment. Simple like that.
Sergio Moro's critics say his understated style is deceptive. Former President Lula has accused him of behaving like an all-powerful czar.
This is a wrong picture about the case. For example, about this conviction of the former president. There is my decision, there is the decision of the appeal court. The appeal court upheld the conviction, and also they presented habeas corpus in the superior courts in Brasilia, and they lost. So there are a lot of more judges involved in the trial and the judgment of these cases and these appeals. So it's not a one-man job.
The judge, who's described as nerdy by his friends, as a young lawyer meticulously studied a legal case in Italy from the early 90s. Dubbed clean hands, it resulted in the successful prosecution of dozens of what previously were considered untouchable Italian politicians and businessmen. Moro was convinced that the same could be done in Brazil.
There are a lot of points in common with the clean hands operation. For example, considering the cases already tried in Brazil, in these Petrobras cases, it seems that the payments of bribes were a kind of a rule in Petrobras contracts. So if you want a contract with Petrobras, you have to pay for it, pay bribes to the executives and pay bribes for politicians.
The Day of the Flag in Brazil. This solemn annual commemoration marks a key moment in the foundation of the Republic 129 years ago. The day when the Brazilian army, having just forced the royal family from power, unveiled the nation's new, enduring symbol. At this event in Sao Paulo, the presiding general had a message for the troops. All Brazilians should learn to love their flag, he said. Then he added something significant. As of January 2019, he said, he prayed that respect for the flag and patriotic pride would return to Brazil. That was a direct reference to the incoming president, a man the Brazilian army is welcoming to power, confident that he is on their side. Jair Bolsonaro may have left the army when he was in his 30s, but as a congressman, he's been a defender of the military for decades. And that includes the soldiers that governed this country from 1964 to 1985, having seized power in a coup. Here he was speaking to CGTN in 2017.
Nós não tivemos ditadura aqui, tá? Nós tivemos regime militar com autoridade, com disciplina, que fez o Brasil crescer em todos os aspectos, inclusive na economia. Se algum militar chegar ao poder, que pode chegar, será pela via do voto direto.
So now the former paratrooper is to be president. Does that mean the army will be back in power here too?
General, good afternoon. Thank you so much.
We spoke to Brazil's incoming vice president, a former general, who said such fears are misplaced. The vice president is one of 4 generals in the Bolsonaro cabinet, but he insists the country is not about to turn the clock back.
What happens is we in military, we have principles, we have values, and the population was looking for this. That's why a lot of military has been elected to Congress. In our case, Bolsonaro and I, we've been elected as citizens of Brazil. Okay, we came from military, but Bolsonaro is a politician in the last 30 years. I think he's more a politician than a military.
But he's very much given the impression that it is the army that can put this house in order. And that has been picked up by the population and by the electorate. They have accepted that message. And is that the way you see this going, that a sort of military style approach to some of the big problems in this country, such as crime, that only the army can put this house in order?
Now, what I see is the principle of order has been shattered in the last times here in Brazil. Okay? And no country can live without order, without authority. Obvious that order and authority has to be together with the law. Okay? Nothing outside the law, nothing outside the Constitution. And what has happened here in Brazil, that the law enforcement was very soft. We need to be more hard.
That sort of language troubles Rita Sipahi, now 80 As a young lawyer, she was imprisoned and tortured by Brazil's military rulers, none of whom were ever prosecuted. In fact, one of the alleged torturers from that era has been praised by Jair Bolsonaro. Sipahi believes strongly that because Brazil never confronted its past, its future is perilous. Tabita Amaral had a tough childhood. This is the story of how she overcame that challenge to become an inspiration for many Brazilians.
My mom was a house cleaner and an embroiderer, and my father was a bus fare collector, which meant that we had a very hard life, even though I'm very proud of the neighborhood where I come from.
Tabita had just started studying at her local state school when one of her teachers, Simone da Silva, noticed something about her. She was gifted at math.
Logo de cara eu percebi que ela era uma aluna que tinha potencial grande, principalmente como eu era professora de matemática dela, eu percebia isso na área de exatas, mas também ela era uma aluna muito aplicada nas outras áreas.
Her school decided to encourage her to compete in the Math Olympiad, a national competition for gifted children like her.
I had a math teacher, Professora Simone, who knew I liked to study a lot and suggested that she could practice with me if I wanted to. I loved the idea, and I did well in the first Olympiad. I was a silver medal, and in the second year I won a gold medal, which got me a scholarship in a very good private school in São Paulo. And that's when my whole life changed. For the first time, I saw how unequal São Paulo is. I saw how unequal my country is. And for me, it was very hard somehow to understand that this inequality was not only related to health or access to education or security or how illuminated the streets were. With everything that happened, I really saw how unequal things are in Brazil and how deep this inequality is. And having seen everything that education did to me at the same time that I saw all its absence was making in Brazil, really put this drive in me of like, I really wanted to work with education. So in my second year, I changed my major from astrophysics to government.
And in her second year, Tabita began to enjoy university.
Tabita Amaral de Pontes, government, magna cum laude with highest honors.
She graduated with honours, and then she made another big decision.
Tabita Amaral para deputada federal.
She decided to return home and stand for Congress.
We're looking at Venezuela's election. It's approaching, and we're also looking at key events in the country's history. It's part of our series, Rediscovering the New World. CGTN's Stephen Gibbs reports on the rise of Hugo Chavez, from a leftist paratroop commander to leader who ruled the nation for 14 years.
Todavía estamos observando a través de la pantalla de su televisor y evidentemente.
February the 4th, 1992, and normal programming on Venezuelan TV was interrupted by this unfolding story.
Está aproximadamente a una cuadra del Palacio de Miraflores.
An attempted coup is taking place on the streets of Caracas. The men in the red berets are rebel paratroopers. That's an armoured vehicle driving up the stairs right in front of the presidential palace. It was an attempt to remove from office and possibly kill the president, Carlos Andrés Pérez. His popularity had sunk after his decision to impose neoliberal reforms had led to mass protests, which had been brutally suppressed. As the troops were trying to storm the palace, Pérez was inside with his Minister of Defense, General Fernando Ochoa. 26 years later, the now retired general says that night remains as vivid as ever.
Tank battalion had arrived here. This was a very difficult situation. So I spoke to the President Pérez. I asked him to make a statement because the situation was very serious.
No one quite knew it at the time, but what happened in the hours that followed was pivotal in Venezuelan history. And it had more to do with the power of television than the power of the bullet. First, Ochoa told the president he must address the nation. That involved him sneaking out of the palace and traveling several miles across Caracas.
He said, "I can't leave." I said, "If you don't do this, you won't stop it. If you don't speak to the country, the situation will not change." He said, "Ochoa, I really think I could lose my life here, but this is my duty and I will do it."
The president said the situation was being addressed and that the coup plotters were traitors. Outside, the assault, in which 3 of the president's bodyguards were amongst at least 14 killed, was turning into a failure, with communications problems and betrayals. But a message needed to be sent to those participating in the rebellion elsewhere in the country to stand down. It was then that the defense minister made a fateful decision. He allowed the leader of the coup to appear on television.
The president said to me, "Make sure it's recorded, that it is pre-recorded. Don't play it out live. It should be recorded."
But he was told that was not possible. The situation was too urgent.
So I took the decision. Maybe I was wrong, under my responsibility to let him speak live.
And who was that man that was given an opportunity to speak to the nation on live television? There he is, on the right, a then little-known paratroop commander about to become the most famous soldier in Venezuela.
Comrades, unfortunately for the moment, the objectives that we had set for ourselves had not been achieved in the capital. That is to say, those of us here in Caracas have not been able to seize power.
For the moment were the key words. He would be back. Chavez was arrested and sent to a military prison. A year later, Perez was impeached. But in 1998, the now civilian Hugo Chavez was elected president of Venezuela in a landslide vote. For 14 years, he led the country on a radical socialist path. A popular revolution, he called it. Dangerous populism, said his enemies. February the 4th, 1992, is commemorated every year as the day his rise to power began. When he died of cancer in 2013, his body was returned to the headquarters of the uprising, where it still remains. As for General Ochoa, now nearly 80, he admits that not a day goes past when he doesn't reflect on that decision to give the oxygen of publicity to a man that changed this nation. Stephen Gibbs, CGTN, Caracas.
Venezuela is voting for president on Sunday. The controversial election comes amid an economic crisis and cries of foul play from the opposition, which is boycotting the process. Here's CGTN's Stephen Gibbs.
Nothing, it seems, was going to stop him. Threats, pleas, warnings from dozens of countries have not persuaded President Maduro to halt an election which his critics say is flawed.
From the Miranda State, I say to you, imperialists and their lackeys, there will be presidential elections in Venezuela come rain, thunder, or lightning on Sunday, May 20th.
This country's main opposition coalition is boycotting the process. But that does not mean Maduro is standing unopposed. His main rival is a former state governor, Henry Falcon. He promises to replace Venezuela's now nearly worthless local currency with the US dollar. Also standing is Javier Bertucci, an evangelical pastor with no political experience. He says it's time for a non-politician to rule this troubled country. The biggest question now is, will people actually vote or support the opposition boycott? We came across this truck selling chicken and asked some of the customers. This woman said yes, she will vote.
You have to vote, because if you want to remove someone from power, it's with votes, right?
But this man told us he'll stay at home on election day.
My decision not to vote is to do with the lack of hope that doing so will solve the economic situation of the country. That is what we all want, that there is real work, real production, that there is an end to this inflation.
inflation is what everyone was talking about. A month's state pension is not enough to buy just 2 chickens. Well, can the incumbent candidate in such a situation actually win? Well, in this election, yes, he can. Stephen Gibbs, CGTN, Caracas.
Nicolas Maduro has won another term as president of Venezuela. The election was boycotted by the opposition and described as a sham by Washington. President Trump has since imposed further sanctions on Venezuela's economy. CGTN's Stephen Gibbs is in Caracas with more.
For the president's supporters, it was a reason to celebrate. Another 6 years for Latin America's most controversial leader. He believes he's proved his critics wrong.
Gracias por sobreponerse a tantas agresiones, a tantas mentiras.
Thank you for overcoming so many aggressions, so many lies. Thank you for joining in so many battles, and thank you for making me president of Venezuela for the period of 2019 through 2025. Thank you, beloved people of Venezuela.
But many are questioning the validity of the victory. The president's main rival in the election, which was boycotted by most of the Venezuelan opposition, said there were serious discrepancies. His chief complaint involved these red tents, which were set up outside almost all polling stations. They were staffed by Socialist Party representatives taking note of voters' ID card numbers. Critics of the government say this is tantamount to buying votes, as the same ID cards are required to receive subsidized food. It was complaints like that which prompted the US government to declare the election fake. President Trump on Monday signed an executive order preventing all US entities from buying or selling any debt issued by Venezuela or its national oil company PDVSA, turning the screws on an already troubled economy here. Several Latin American nations, including Venezuela's neighbors Colombia and Brazil, have also said they will not recognize the result and are considering their own financial sanctions. Well, President Maduro is not entirely alone. There are sympathetic governments in this region. Bolivia, El Salvador, Cuba have all offered their support, but the economic pressure is mounting. Stephen Gibbs, CGTN, Caracas. It's breakfast time at the Bambi orphanage in Caracas, and there are plenty of hungry mouths to feed. The charity, which has been around for 22 years, has never been so busy. The reason why reflects a sad statistic. An increasing number of Venezuelan parents cannot afford to look after their children. They're handing them over voluntarily to the orphanage. That, say those that work here, is troubling and new.
So we didn't receive parents bringing their kids directly to the door. And now we have they want to leave them because they cannot give them the food they need. Or food or diapers or anything, so they bring them to us for help.
Leaving a child for others to care for is for anyone a momentous choice.
No parent wants to give up a child. For many, it's the most difficult decision they've ever made. But when they see their children are recovering from the problems they had when they arrived, then the parents feel better.
The aim is always that the children, wherever possible, eventually return to their families.
We do everything we can to make sure the children receive what they need and deserve: love, attention, food, education, and recreation. But we can never replace the comfort, the love that exists between a child and its parents.
Those that make it here, one of the best funded orphanages in the country, are the lucky ones. There's 60 spaces in this particular orphanage, and it's completely oversubscribed. The same night that one of these beds becomes free, another child will arrive. Often it is the Venezuelan government, whose own state orphanages are also full, that's asking if there's any space here.
We received a lot of phone calls from the government asking for the place, the bed, and we have to say no all the time. Every day we say no.
The orphanage is staffed by a mixture of paid employees and volunteers, and supported mainly by donations from Venezuelans, both here and abroad. This country is going through the deepest economic crisis in its history, but what there is no shortage of is people that want to help. Stephen Gibbs, CGTN, Caracas. Jordan, 2016. And a group of young Venezuelan women was proving everyone wrong. In the midst of an economic crisis back home, and hailing from a non-footballing, sometimes macho nation, they'd made it to the semi-finals of the FIFA Under-17s World Cup. The nation's hopes were pinned on Dana Castellanos. From nowhere, she was showing that she is one of the best female players in the world. A documentary about the team was released this year in Venezuela. Titled "They Call Us Warriors," it followed the players as they prepared for the competition and revealed the tough conditions these superstars come from.
Yo digo que una de las cosas por la cual yo seguí jugando y mi inspiración era esa, pues darle lo mejor a mi familia. En cierta parte, pues I am here in Venezuela now.
Edwin Corona and Jennifer Socorro were co-directors of the film. Jennifer is herself a football player.
When I was little, my mom doesn't want me to play. And all the things that you heard is like, what are you going to do? You're a girl. You can't make a life out of this.
The girls don't play football.
Girls don't play soccer. That's for men. But now the girls, the little girls have idols to admire, and you listen. And it's for us was like a huge surprise. To her girls to say Dana is my idol, I want to be like her. There are people like have tattoos in their bodies of Veronica, of Sandra, of Dana, you know.
The film has been well received at international festivals.
The success of the women's team was an inspiration here in Venezuela, where despite all the problems this country faces, league matches are still regularly played.
There are 29 professional female teams that compete in this country's Premier League. And no one here forgets that Under-17 team of 2016.
It gave me goosebumps, looking at them all and seeing the situation in which they lived and how they managed to get where they did, struggling every day, training day and night. Those young women gave it everything. It makes me proud to be here.
Proud to be Venezuelan, something you don't hear enough these days. Stephen Gibbs, CGTN, Caracas.